Hello and welcome all to this panel discussion on the Pakistan-U.S. relationship. This panel is being hosted by the Pakistan program at USIP. I'm Moeed Yusuf, South Asia Advisor. I oversee the Pakistan activities of the program. The Pakistan program here does both analytical work on conflict and peace dynamics in Pakistan, furthering the Institute's goals of peace building in conflict regions, and also programmatic work through supporting civil society organizations in Pakistan, capacity building, working with religious scholars, training on conflict resolution techniques, and all the rest, details of which you can find on our website. Today's panel is of special importance for obvious reasons. The US elections, the re-election of President Obama, and what are we looking at in the next 2 years till 2014 when the Afghanistan transition, security transition, and political transition is going to take place. This is after a long, long time. And so I'm going to say this. I don't know whether I'll get another chance. I hope I will. But I don't know after how long I can say that since we held a panel on this topic last, which was right around the Salalah incident, things have finally improved. One hopes that this continues. Somebody just mentioned to me that the Pakistani foreign minister just gave an interview in which he said that everything in the relationship seems to be perfectly fine. Not sure I'll go that far, but we're certainly at a better position than we were about 6 months ago when there were, the supply routes were closed and there was hardly any conversation going on. Let me introduce the panelists, two of them who are here, one of them who's going to arrive as we start. Sajid Gandhi, who is a professional staff member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he'll be talking to us from the perspective of the Hill. What are they looking at in terms of the Pakistan-US relationship and the mood about Pakistan? Symbol Khan, who is the head of the Central Asia program at the Institute for Strategic Studies in Islamabad, and currently the Pakistan Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and her expertise is in regional politics, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the US. And we'll also be joined by Michael Phelan, who is the professional staff member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and has worked very, very closely over the years with the Kerry-Lugar bill and everything else that transpired in the Senate on Pakistan. Each of them will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. You have mics on the side. I would request you to come there, introduce yourself, and then ask your question. This is an on-the-record event for the benefit of people who have to put out a disclaimer. Masajid, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Moeed, and thanks to the U.S. Institute of Peace for hosting us in what I hope will be a valuable conversation. Before I start, I just have to say these are my personal views, and they don't necessarily reflect that of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I thought I would take a little bit of a tact, and before talking about where I think we're going to go from 2012 to 2014, look at where we sort of started from in 2009, and from the political lens. So in 2009, when the president came into office, I think there was opportunities on both sides to start anew. We had a situation here where obviously we had a new president, and we were starting with the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill. This was floating around the Congress. And the bill in itself, I think, was pretty far-reaching. Here we had a situation where we were moving from a relationship that was very much military to military focused. We were in this post-Musharraf era, and we finally, I think in the US, realized that we can't have a real relationship with Pakistan if we were just going to be looking at things that were important to the United States and Pakistan. So let's put our money where our mouth is and spend some money in doing some real civilian assistance. So the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill, it passed unanimously. You had support from all sides of the aisle to make sure that this bill was going to move forward. And it was in this political climate where everyone was willing to do a little bit more for Pakistan. I think at the same time, you had the appointment of Richard Holbrooke, who many of us, I think, in this room either have read about or got a chance to know or work with. And he was a force on Pakistan when he took this job. He was able to bring the full weight of the US government. And by that I mean really push everyone to do kind of what he wanted. And I think in his vision, he really wanted to find a way to show to Pakistan what a normal relationship with the United States might look like. to bring more than just the counterterrorism, the non-proliferation conversations to the table. And to start this process, to look at how we can create a long-term strategic partnership with Pakistan. This was sort of the narrative that we were working on from 2009 to 2010, and move away from that mill sort of standard. I think we were at that point in 2010 up to about 13 different strategic dialogues that we were having as part of this larger strategic dialogue with Pakistan. And then in Pakistan at that same time period, we were working on this post-Musharraf phase where there was, I think, a renewed hope for democracy with the new PPP government. And so I think in both countries you had this opening to at least try and start to turn the page. Unfortunately, I think we were sort of doomed from the beginning with the orchestrated response to Kerry Lugar-Berman in Pakistan. What many of us thought could have been a really valuable and constructive piece of legislation that could have some meaningful impact. It sort of was tainted from the beginning. And I think, unfortunately, we haven't been able to make as much progress as we wanted to with that legislation. Now, there's still 2 years left, so we still have some movement there and hope that it can improve now that, as the foreign minister has said, it's getting better or it's perfectly fine. But I think that tainting sort of hurt the progress of that bill and the impact that civilian assistance could have. At the same time, in that time period, we also had things like no real movement on the irritants in the relationship, as we would say from our side, from the U.S. side. I think Ambassador Holbrooke, while wanting to normalize the relationship, also realized that we had some serious asks that we wanted the Pakistanis to move forward on. Things like the Haqqani Network, safe havens for the Taliban, general progress and cooperation on terrorism. We were hearing from President Zardari and General Gayani that this was their war, this was their fight, and starting in 2008 and 2009, you saw increased attacks on the Pakistani state from TTP and others. And so there was an assumption that everyone was sort of in this together. And then we thought that would result in some real shifts on the ground. I think this, on top of the Kerry Lugar-Berman flap, we also started seeing, of course, the Raymond Davis incident set things back. And then the fallout from the Bin Laden raid. And sort of it harmed the progress. And every time one of these things would happen, it sort of closed the aperture a little bit from what was really wide in 2009. It made the aperture for progress and the appetite on the Hill a little smaller. And I think this sort of, for us in the U.S., the aperture actually closed when Admiral Mullen made his statement at the Senate Armed Services Committee on September in 2011. Admiral Mullen, I think, especially on the Hill, he really uses political capital, met with members regularly to sell everyone on this relationship. He really believed in the relationship with Pakistan and growing it and expanding it. And so when he made, I think the statement that many of us are familiar with, that the Haqqani Network is a variable arm of the ISI, it sent a strong signal to folks on the Hill that, wow, this man who was sort of championing the relationship has now stepped away from it. And I think many people in Congress started, I think Pakistan lost the benefit of the doubt in Congress, and that was sort of the end. And political spaces sort of no longer exists to do much more. And then I think at the same time in Pakistan, I think the Salalah incident did the same thing, where we created an environment where there was a lack of trust, a lack of vision. I think not a lack of vision, a lack of trust on the Pakistani side for the U.S. That it took 6-7 months for us to come over that and get over that. The Salalah incident also sort of sent the relationship back in a spiral. But what I think the good thing that came out of that was this pause that we had and the recalibration of the relationship moving forward. And I think this is where we're gonna see a move from 2012 to 2014. This recalibration allowed both of our sides, the U.S. and the Pakistanis, to one, I think, let the tension calm down. I think everyone has sort of taken a step back, and the tension has decreased. And I think the other thing is it's allowed us to, unfortunately, sort of look at what are the core near-term goals, and let's just focus on those areas. So moving forward from 2012 to 2014, I think that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus, again, unfortunately, on things like CT and non-proliferation only. We're going to look at things like a counter-IED working group and try to hope that we can get some cooperation from the Pakistanis on reconciliation and the transition. And I think at the same time also look at ways that we can do some other small, I hope meaningful areas of cooperation like this bilateral investment treaty. Hopefully there are ways that we can work together to kind of move those kinds of initiatives forward. But ultimately, I think what's going to happen is our goals in Pakistan are going to be limited. There's no doubt about it. We're going to have the withdrawal is going to occur, and our troops are going to leave by 2014. Combat troops will be out by the end of 2014. And I think Pakistan lost the opportunity to play the point guard and really being helpful in helping us do the transition. And I think there's sort of two options left. Pakistan can either stay on the sidelines, which I think is sort of mostly what's happening now with a little bit of action on the side, or it can play a spoiler. And I think Pakistan's calculation is that it's not really in its interest to play the spoiler. But I don't see yet that there's been a big shift in Pakistan to start playing the point guard and playing an active role in making reconciliation and transition actually work. And the sort of other, I think, piece of this is we have to look at one of the fundamental assumptions that we have, which I think was in sort of the mailer for this event, is does the U.S. and Pakistan have to have a good relationship for transition and withdrawal to occur? And I think that's the wrong question. I think we need to not ask that question, mostly because in the history of it, whether or not the U.S. and Pakistan get along or have a good relationship doesn't really affect what Pakistan's strategy is in Afghanistan. Pakistan's strategy in Afghanistan is based on Pakistan's national security interests. And I think the question that we have to really be asking ourselves is how do we help Pakistan address its national security interests? I don't think we really have a direct role to play in answering that question. I think that there are things we can do to help Pakistan address that issue. But absent anyone giving or providing security guarantees, which I don't think is on the table, I think that's a question that Pakistan has to answer with Afghanistan. And I think we can play a role in helping and pushing Pakistan and Afghanistan have a meaningful conversation or series of conversations on addressing some of these irritants in their relationship. But ultimately, whether or not we have a good relationship with Pakistan is not going to, I think, change Pakistan's strategy in Afghanistan. It's an internal national security interest. Going forward, the one thing I hope is that we no longer hear the terminology, how do we help Pakistan change its strategic calculus? For me, that's like hearing, hands on a chalkboard. I hope we never talk about it in that way. I think we have to really look at the sort of what the interests are and address those, and I don't think we've done that in the last 10 years. With regard to the assistance, I hope that the civilian assistance continues. I think in 2014 we're not going to see there's no political space really to see an extension of the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill. I mean, we always talk, if you sort of come to the Hill and you see any of our hearings, everyone says we're borrowing money from China to do X, Y, and Z. And I think the space to give this kind of funding to Pakistan is not going to exist in 2014. But I do hope in a more normal relationship, we'll see a more regular and normalized civilian assistance program that's not subject to any kind of political football with regard to Pakistan's support for what we all hope is, core interest in Afghanistan, or fighting the war on terror, or fighting extremists. This is something that's going to have to, I think, if we want to sort of look at direct correlation, I think security assistance, we're going to have a real reevaluation of our security assistance and how we provide security assistance and come up with security assistance for Pakistan. If we want to address Pakistan's doing or not doing things that we want Pakistan to do, things like coalition support funds and the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Fund, that's what we should be looking at if we're going to play a political football with assistance. It should be what's directly related to what the sort of outcomes we want to see. I think it also sends a bad message if we're going to play political football with civilian assistance, which is really to send a message to the people of Pakistan that we really do want to help the people of Pakistan. And then the last thing I think, and I hope we sort of move away from this, is as we go to these limited goals in Pakistan of counterterrorism and non-proliferation, I hope we can find a way to keep it not just so limited on these specific military asks. I think we've seen how the mill-mill cooperation story ends, and it's not a good ending for any of us. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Thanks. Can I ask you two questions before we move to symbol?
Sure.
Just to clarify so that when we get to the Q&A, we can have a discussion on this. One, you mentioned Pakistan's interests. You don't want to hear, please change your strategic paradigm. Right?
Right.
Fair enough. But I've also not heard you talk about India. And the entire strategic paradigm actually flows through New Delhi. So if you're not going to ask Pakistan to change the strategic paradigm, but the India part is also going to remain intact, Why are we expecting more support from Pakistan in Afghanistan? And the second question is, you say Kerry-Lugar bill may not be extended, but you hope that there's a normal civilian assistance program. At the same time, you say that the goals are really non-proliferation and counterterrorism. How does that add up?
Sure. Do you want to address those now? Please. I'll take that. Let me just kind of So on the last one, what I'll say is if the military-to-military goals are non-proliferation, counterterrorism, which I agree with you, I think that's what all we're looking at. I think it's still extremely important that we look at the non-military parts of the relationship and the civilian assistance. Whether or not we expect military cooperation on certain things or cooperation on other things, I think it's still critical that we have a civilian assistance program that's separate from these areas, these issues. So yes to looking at restrictions on PCCF and the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capability Fund. I mean, we're not really seeing much counterinsurgency, or to the coalition support funds. Let's look and see how those affect direct support for operations, in the tribal areas of Pakistan or in Afghanistan. But when we talk about civilian aid, I mean, if we're going to put restrictions on civilian aid, it should be, are there going to be changes in how Pakistan works its energy sector? Are there going to be any kind of issues on Pakistan actually making some real big changes in its tax and its revenue collection? And so if we're going to put restrictions on, we should have the restrictions or the certifications really apply to where the assistance comes from, where it flows, and what the intended achievement is. On the India piece, I would agree with you sort of partially. I think, yes, half of it is New Delhi. I think the other half is Afghanistan. There's still a lot of outstanding questions on the Durand Line and on what does this sort of Afghanistan not recognizing the Durand Line mean for the Pashtuns in Pakistan. You're right, there still is a huge security component with India, and there has to be a conversation with India. But that's not something that the U.S. can or should get involved with. That's something that Pakistan and India need to do. I'm not one that puts a lot of faith or credence in this sort of fast turnaround. Yeah, I think it's fantastic that India and Pakistan are starting to have this dialogue on trade and improving trade. Do I think this is going to happen next year, in the next 2 years? No. Do I think it's going to have an impact long term? I think absolutely, and I think this is going to be part of the reason that you don't see as much, I think, conversation on the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan piece anymore is because you have this own organic opening between India and Pakistan.
Good, excellent. Thank you. Symbol, if we could have you to present how things look from Pakistan, and then we'll go to Michael. Welcome.
Thank you, and apologies for a late arrival.
If you have a PowerPoint, you may want to go there.
Yeah,
it's on the computer.
Is it there?
Yeah, so you can It's a couple of slides, right?
Yeah.
I think it should be.
Yeah. Is it on? How do you?
You want to press function F. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I was asked today to speak on whether the U.S. outlook towards Pakistan is likely to change in President Obama's second term. Let me start by saying what is not going to change. I think there are three core issues which have shaped bilateral relations in the last term and will continue to shape U.S.-Pakistan engagement in the next 4 years. These three core areas of engagement are, of course, transition in Afghanistan, counterterrorism, and the structure of U.S. assistance to Pakistan, both security and economic. And on that, I am grateful to the first speaker because I have decided that I will just limit my presentation to the first two issues because I want to better manage my 15 minutes. And he has spoken about some of the very important issues that I wanted to bring out also. So the other important thing that is not going to change is what Moeed started off with, and that is the inherent fragility of Pakistan's and U.S. relations. They were vulnerable to changes or challenge of unforeseen forces on the ground, non-state actors which exist in within Pakistan's borders, military action on the border like we saw in Salalah and disrupted relations. So unlike our dear Foreign Minister Hina Rabbani Khar, I tend to agree with Moeed more that danger remains very much there, and that is a factor that has to be factored in. Okay, a transition in Afghanistan. Over the years, U.S. policy on Pakistan has often been criticized for being too Afghan-centric, and that Pakistan is entirely looked at from the prism of Afghanistan. I don't think that's going to change at all in the next few years. If anything, as we move closer to the 2014 drawdown, I think developments in Afghanistan are going to drive US policy on Pakistan even more strongly, if that was possible. We saw differences, and the problem is here that we saw differences on Afghanistan bring bilateral relations to the impasse that we went through last year, and which, of course, Pakistan closed the transit route and after the Salalah incident. So what is different this time around? What is happening that's going to be different? Well, how things stand today. For one, both administrations have come out of the impasse with far more sober assessments of the role that each is likely to play in the other's game plan. The US has learned that although the expansion of the NDN or the Northern Distribution Network reduced their logistic dependence on Pakistan routes out of Pakistan territory, it would be enormously more expensive, both materially and politically, to manage the orderly withdrawal out of Afghanistan without having Pakistan on board. The lesson for Pakistan was twofold. A permanent break in relations with the US, its main economic and military, economic and security benefactor, threatened global isolation at a point when its own regional environment looks quite unstable. Secondly, at this point, when the looming 2014 drawdown in Afghanistan threatens to alter the security dynamics on the ground in unpredictable ways, engagement with the US, no matter how imperfect, gives it more space to push forward its own vision of post-2014 Afghanistan. Going forward towards 2014, certain developments on the Afghan front are likely to add a new texture to US-Pak relations. And some of these are as follows. As political processes take center stage, in preparation of full transfer to Afghan control, kinetic aspects of the Afghan campaign are no longer going to be the focal point. This shift away of focus in US strategy from military to political is likely to create greater space for US and Pakistan engagement. Some of this is already in evidence. Even though the election cycle had kind of absorbed US attention last 6 months, a number of high-level interactions and engagements have taken place so far. In September, the first meeting of the Safe Passage working group took place in Islamabad in September, and this group has been constituted to basically discuss the modalities of allowing Taliban negotiators to travel abroad for negotiations. Immediately after this meeting, Ambassador Grossman was in Islamabad to kind of endorse this whole process, and then after that we saw Hina Rabbani-Kar in DC, where she basically spend most of her time talking about Afghanistan rather than other aspects of US-Pakistan bilateral relations. The designation of the Haqqani network as a FTO around this time kind of upstaged all these developments, but important to remember that that designation actually did not derail this process that had started, of a reset process that started between US and Pakistan, especially on the issue of Afghanistan. The recent visit to Islamabad of Burhanuddin Rabbani, who heads the High Peace Council, and the release of Taliban prisoners in Pakistan's custody, to me look like rungs on a ladder which are leading towards some kind of a formal, broader negotiated process in Afghanistan. And there are also indications that the Taliban today might be persuaded to join direct talks or negotiations with the Afghan government, which they have been resisting for a long time. And the view was that Pakistan's role is absolutely important in this context. And in my opinion, today Pakistan is playing a far more proactive role on this issue than it did in the past. Sorry, I'll just go back to the last slide. Let's keep up on the last slide. I don't know how to go back to the last slide. Well, Yeah, okay, yeah. One important aspect is the upcoming presidential elections in Afghanistan, which actually coincide with the 2014 drawdown, are likely to be another area of engagement between US and Pakistan. Afghanistan's own internal political and power dynamics undoubtedly are going to shape this transition. But saying that, factional politics, weak or non-existent political party structures, no one clear presidential candidate on the scene at this moment, make this a very fragile moment. The role that both Pakistan and Iran are likely to play, as these two countries have enormous patronage networks within the political power circles within Afghanistan, within the central government, as well as on regional power brokers. They can be brought along to build consensus around some candidates going closer towards the presidential elections. I see US-Pak engagement on this area also expand as we move closer to 2014. Okay, this is all right. Counterterrorism strategies. Well, few comments just to frame where US-Pakistan stand at this moment on counterterrorism. The Navy SEAL raid, of course, on Osama bin Laden was without a doubt the lowest moment in the realm of counter-terror cooperation between US and Pakistan. The level and lack of trust when it happened before and after that is in sharp contrast to where the relationship stood at after 9/11, when both sides cooperated in detaining Al-Qaeda operatives and dismantling the whole structure. Last few years, US has been frustrated by Pakistan's unwillingness to act against all homegrown militant groups, some of which have known links with Al-Qaeda. CT cooperation, counter-terror cooperation, has also suffered because of disagreements regarding which group and individuals qualify as legitimate targets for CT operations. From the US perspective, under President Obama's first term, some believe that increased reliance on drones partly happened because to compensate for this lack of cooperation, CT cooperation on the ground, and partly to exercise freedom on the selection of legitimate targets for CT operations. On the Pakistan side, as domestic terrorism became a growing threat inside Pakistan, the expanded use of drones, and the extensive intelligence and counter-terror network that US has established within Pakistan became a hotly contested issue. US counter-terror mission in Pakistan as things stand today. So what happens next? Going forward, counterterrorism will remain the #1 US preoccupation in the region and its relations with Pakistan. There is going to be continued expectation that Pakistan move decisively against those that use Pakistan territory and share Al-Qaeda's objectives in harming US interests globally, and that can lead to India and Pakistan towards a nuclear conflagration. However, as the broader military campaign in Afghanistan is rolled back and the physical presence of Al-Qaeda diminishes from the region, the tactics and operational strategies are likely to see some changes, some modifications, some adaptations to the new configuration of forces post-2014. Post-2014 counterterrorism approaches. President Obama in his election campaign has made it clear that as US moves towards a lighter footprint, as it draws down, it is still, US will be committed to maintaining its capacity to use drones and special forces to go after terrorist havens on multiple fronts. Yet at the same time, US military presence shrinks in Afghanistan, the need for better working relationship with state security actors both in Afghanistan and Pakistan will actually increase in order to contain and deny space to Al-Qaeda remnants. This is likely to modify and reshape how US develops and applies various counterterrorism approaches to Pakistan. Some of this is already in evidence. There has been a sharp reduction in the number of drone strikes in the last, if we compare the 3 months from August to November in 2011 to August to November 2012. Of course, this is too short a data set to really make long-term projections, but I think we need to watch this. But in my opinion, there is some modification. This is signaling to me that the US is moving away from signature and force protection strikes while retaining its ability to take out high-value targets. This is something that the Pakistani side had been urging the US. This is something that the Pakistanis had wanted for a long time. So I do see some tentative evidence of this kind of a modification taking place. And also by striking some TTP targets in Kunar and Nuristan, which happened last month, and shrinking the number of strikes in FATA, there are indications that behind the scenes, US and Pakistan are trying to bring some coordination back to the drone program. This, for me, could also be a template of how things are going to function post-2014, as US strategy shifts from war against Taliban to more of a counterterrorism presence in the region. This is the same kind of a visual. Last concluding remarks. Going forward towards 2014, there is a narrow window, in my opinion, there is a narrow window of opportunity to reset relations with Pakistan. Looking for clues for future policy directions in official speech acts, I think Secretary Panetta's speech last week at the CNAS gave us some clues. He spoke about, of course, the challenges in the bilateral relationship between Pakistan and US, but he mentioned that one area where our national interests continue to align is defeating terrorists on Pakistani soil. More importantly, to quote, he said, "We remain committed to pursuing defense cooperation based on these shared interests." This is important. Resourcing Pakistan's military's counter-terror capacity in an area where some progress is likely, is an area where some progress is likely in the next term. Some of the US trainers which had left after the Salala incident are reportedly back. Pakistan military past few years has built up its CT capacity, its CT doctrine, but is in dire need for aerial platforms such as heavy lift helicopters, combat helicopters, advanced IED detection equipment, mine-resistant vehicles. So all these areas is something where I feel that there will be some movement forward. Last two comments. In the end, on the US side, there appears to be an underlying realization that even if Pakistan is not fighting all those that threaten US interest in Afghanistan, it is fighting a number of other actors, militant actors, which share Al-Qaeda's global vision and share Al-Qaeda's regional agenda. The 150,000 Pakistani troops which remain on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border are likely to continue fighting militants long after US and NATO troops leave from Afghanistan. Saying that, the important caveat is still that US sensitivity to Pakistan's internal battles, its desire to pursue its own counterterrorism doctrine, will be contingent on more decisive action from Pakistan to neutralize the threat of non-state actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can just shut the... Thank you. Simal, if I may just ask you one clarification, and then we'll move to Michael. I think you've talked about this without mentioning this, but one of the things that keeps coming back over and over in the discourse on Pakistan here is this question of will versus capacity. And so you talk about ID equipment and helis and whatever. I think perhaps the predominant view here is it's not about the equipment, it's about the will. Pakistan, of course, says, well, it's the capacity issue. Help us understand a little bit where reality lies. Is it in between somewhere, or is it, is Pakistan completely exhausted?
I think definitely in between somewhere. As you said, I think there isn't a capacity issue, which I tried to mention within. I think I'm really positive that this kind of a support that can be forthcoming going forward. But the will issue, for me, the will issue is basically boils down to the good Taliban and bad Taliban. And in that context, for me, it's not good and bad Taliban. It is, for me, the distinction is Afghan Taliban and Pakistani Taliban. And I feel there can be movement forward there as we see the war in Afghanistan becoming less about a war against Taliban, which I feel a change coming on in US strategy. So there is a potential forward, but the reluctance here is Pakistan has shied away from fully supporting US war against the Taliban in Afghanistan, and that's been the biggest dilemma. Thanks.
It's okay. Michael, I've introduced you in absentia, but please do talk from sort of the Senate's perspective on Pakistan-U.S. as you see it going forward. Of course, the Senate had this vote on sort of Pakistan aid, and the only thing I'll throw out is that, you know, the coverage was essentially saying, well, it was defeated very easily. I saw it slightly differently, which is that 10% of the Senate actually voted to cut off Pakistan aid. We've heard a bit of optimism here, and I'm wondering whether you'll share that, please.
Well, it depends where the optimism is focused. Certainly, as it comes to the discussions in Congress, the optimism for budgets across the board is not there. It's rather a pessimistic situation. I apologize for my delay. We had a couple of hearings this morning and beginning this afternoon. One of the nice things about the hearing setup is we have the first panel consisting of administration witnesses, and thus we can build our comments a little bit more easily in a second panel after directly questioning the representatives of the administration. So some of the questions that Moeed has asked us to answer today would be well suited to a panel of administration discussants. But perhaps by hearing from us, the administration can also draw a perspective on the perceptions some of the policy staff or policy offices around Washington, how they perceive what the administration is saying and indicating through some of their actions. While Senator Lugar's name will remain, he's moving on, but the Kerry-Lugar legislation is a 5-year piece of legislation and is consistently has been supported as essential to fulfill its term. Whether or not it's renewed, there was never any judgment rendered at the time of its conclusion as to whether or not it would be renewed. It was recommended that should it prove to be beneficial, to consider a reauthorization for an additional 5 years. But the key element of that legislation, the reason that Senator Lugar, looking at his long experience in dealing diplomatically with countries of many stripes, is to be consistent and to provide a semblance of consistency, especially in the case of Pakistan because of our own history and the perception of that history, which is probably more important than the history itself. So he remains firmly supportive of the legislation and has said as much. And Senator Kerry, while stating publicly that Pakistan has made it incredibly difficult to continue to argue for assistance to Pakistan, he too remains firmly behind his legislation. We're fighting two battles in Congress, or the upcoming Congress. One will be whether or not assistance continues to a country that many perceive, 10% at least, perceive as not rising to the level sufficient to warrant that assistance. And the second one is there are other competing priorities for those resources, for the type of investment that requires. As to your question, whether the second term will have a change in the way the administration approaches Pakistan, I think it's important to understand that Congress will encourage them to change that relationship in that it must be improved. There must be a better outcome, or we must always strive for a better outcome than the one we've experienced over the last several years. So I don't think going down the same road with the same approach is going to garner us much of a difference. The relationship as it relates to the execution of that legislation, as well as additional assistance, has unfortunately, in my view, been far too immersed in the minutiae, in the day-to-day Pakistani development and the execution of their programs. There were times when you wondered whether it wasn't the U.S. who was being expected to pick up the responsibility of different ministries or organizations Many of us were unsure what different elements of our own government, what their role was in each of these, and I did, for one, travel to Pakistan and asked some of the Pakistani ministries what they felt their role was in the U.S. role, and tried to gain a better understanding of how this very close hug relationship was really operating on the ground, in fact. Events have transpired over the last several years that have made self-evident the limits of resource assistance, even technical and, if you will, ministerial support assistance, in that the visits of high-level officials. I can remember before the Kerry Lugar legislation, there were members of the embassy who said, boy, it would really be great if members would come through Pakistan instead of using it as a lily pad to get into Afghanistan. Well, it then became, I wish they'd stop sending so many senior-ranking officials who publicly have a statement or another. The government doesn't need to be seen in such a close light. So we tend to swing from one to the other. One of the real opportunities I saw was to ratchet that back, to really begin to return the relationship to a normal bilateral relationship status, which meant far less attention from the secretaries of each of our agencies, far fewer visits specifically covered by the media as a critical visit, or as a breakthrough visit, or as another step on the way to cooperation in one area or another. It wasn't having the desired effect ultimately. We also found that our media, our public affairs efforts in that country were not up to the level necessary. And we discovered that around the world, not just in Pakistan. This was a revamp of public affairs that we've taken on around the world to try to improve the means by which we provide information about U.S. interests and investment and assistance, but also explain, either explaining in advance of activities or clarifying when there's a misunderstanding about those activities. We just haven't seemed to do as good a job as we could. These difficulties should not come as a surprise. If you're in the development field, we've seen plenty of examples around the world of the challenge of getting development right. If we look at countries in which we'd like to see improved regulatory environments, business environments, which are drivers for investment and further development, we've been routinely disappointed in our own bilateral efforts to swing them around quickly to an environment that would drive and engender further investment by the international community, and for self-serving interests by the United States business community itself. What it requires, what all of them require, is patience, especially in the development area, and a partner across the host government. The Kerry Lugar legislation was declared a partnership with the Pakistani government for a reason. And it was not simply that this was assistance to be provided come what may. This was assistance to be provided in partnership with a country, with a government, with a people that were willing to go along with this partnership, that were willing to invest in the purpose of economic development for the country. And what we found was that the geopolitical interfered with that to a great degree. And I think there were Herculean efforts to try to minimize the negative of the geopolitical upon the gradual development. But I think there are some optimists, Moeed, who would say that we have seen progress in Pakistan. We can measure progress through a variety of political events, a variety of media events, but we've also had the negative events influence it as well, and they will continue to self-interested groups, parties, are a pronounced obstacle to progress in any country, especially those that wield the ultimate authority in these countries. Political parties, in Pakistan, the military vice the civilian, the one region or province vice another. They wield inordinate amount of authority, and they do it to guard their interests. We aren't unfamiliar with that here at home, but it does prevent progress, and it does prevent change, at least in the near term. We must be prepared, our administration must be prepared to understand that that's a factor and a regular occurrence in these relationships. And I think that, as you described well, there has been a much more sober reflection upon this relationship over the events over the last 2 years have provided this opportunity. India, with a slight smirk on its face as well, we could have told you that. In fact, we were trying to tell you that 8-10 years ago, but it seems to be becoming apparent to you as well. The reason we continue to pursue certain things is we have a great deal invested, and the institutions that are investing it are also geared toward a sunk capital cost, if you will, and a belief that their methodology has been improved, and if we could just hold out further for a bit longer, for a consistent period of time, we'll see breakthroughs. I think that's become less evident as a means for bilateral economic assistance. I think, again, I fall back on the necessity for a true and effective partner in these efforts. This also holds true in the realm of national security. It's not just the economic development area. There are plenty of obstacles to progress as we see it from our perspective. And the national security establishment in Pakistan is one of the strongest. It's volatile, and certainly ask General Kayani if he felt a little heat over the last couple of years. So, but it remains a powerful influence, and its interests will remain paramount. Its influence over the media, the message, the myth that sustains its authority. So I think that we must, and we have, I think the administration has taken some good lessons from this. The relationship in the next 4 years will shift, and I think it's about time. I'm encouraged by some of the discussions we've had. I think that we've taken what were a dozen priorities in Pakistan, and we've narrowed them to a handful. Though they were already mentioned by my colleagues here on the panel. We do see Pakistan with more of a sense of a mutual interest and mutual concerns than we did a few years ago. We do see a Pakistan that is, I think, paying more attention to the domestic political and security environment than it might otherwise have paid, and thus has less time to stir the international bilateral. They have to deal with issues at home. India has to deal with issues at home as well. It would love to seize the opportunity to surge forward economically, but then it's suddenly seized by its energy deficit. It comes back to the home domestic issues. The one thing that the South Asia region suffers from, however, is the potential for great disruption due to singular events. We've seen them in the past, and now with the nuclear powers remaining a threat to one another in their own eyes, it will remain as such. The other congressional priority is going to be things that arise elsewhere that draw us away from concentrating so heavily on every turn of the leaf in Pakistan. Right now, certainly Syria, Gaza, and the like. If North Korea fires a missile, as Japan has predicted, they may do in the near future. There again, another example of how we'll be drawn. Iran, obviously. What will bring it back? A terrorist attack driven from Pakistani territory on India is a possibility. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that there will be a change in Congress in the foreign relations committees, both, and maybe more. Who knows who will be the next Secretary of State or other secretary, but there will be some disruption there on the Hill. There will be less familiar leadership. And with that, of course, goes less familiar understanding of the history that comes with it. So there'll be a period of education necessary. I think that the administration, I'm encouraged by the administration's recent discussions, and that the relationship with Pakistan will be more productive. I think we've also lowered our expectations somewhat, so it'll be a bit easier to meet those expectations. So I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all the panelists. We will open the floor for questions. There are mics on the side, so I would please request you to line up there if anyone has questions. If you could go to the mics right behind you. We'll take it from there. I know, Sujit, you want to say something before?
I just wanted to make one comment. Both of my colleagues here have sort of said that we have to have an improved relationship with Pakistan in order for the transition and withdrawal to occur. And I think it's important for us to have a good relationship with Pakistan, but I don't see the correlation between how that results in Pakistan changing its strategy in Afghanistan. It could be the British, it could be the Germans, it could be anyone. But unless the needs or the security interests are really addressed in Afghanistan, whether or not we have a good relationship with Pakistan is going to have, I think, very little to do with what Pakistan's behavior is going to be in Afghanistan.
If I could respond to that. Yes, absolutely an important point. But I think to really discuss and I think you raised it before, what is Pakistan's policy in Afghanistan, we'll have to request Mohit to have another follow-up conference or a talk on that, because I think my mandate wasn't just discussing Pakistan's policy on Afghanistan, and it's very complex. Going forward, many of those goals that Pakistan, without going into the depth of what the policy is and what the strategy is going to be, I think there are a number of issues that Pakistan feels that it can achieve on its own. They are not related just to what the US can do for Pakistan and what you consider. But there are certain goals and avenues going forward to 2014, the change dynamic on the ground, where US and Pakistan engagement at this point, in Pakistan's opinion, there are points of convergence. There are serious points of convergence, and if we had more time, I'd go into them deeply, but there are points of convergence. Of course, there are points of divergence also, but there are points of convergence, and because the situation on the ground is so volatile right at this moment, it is unpredictable. We really don't know how the chips are going to fall. A lot of new avenues are going to open up, but there are points of convergence and divergence with the US.
I would agree that there are points of convergence, and I think we've thought there are points of convergence from 2001. We just haven't seen I think, much change happen or much action happen where that convergence exists.
Because policies.
Let me go to questions. We'll start from here, and I'll come to you after this one. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Iftikhar Hussain, work for Voice of America, partial to the Border Region Service. We broadcast to Pakistan, Afghanistan border regions. Thank you very much for the insight from Capitol Hill. During the discussion, I was wondering that a certain important element is missing in this discussion, and if you could further elaborate on, Michael did mention it in a brief way, and the question is that how much the Pakistan military is entrusted to go along with the United States in the post-2014 situation in Afghanistan. And if you could elaborate on what you said earlier, that how much Pakistan military or the security establishment is an obstacle in relationship in moving forward with the United States. Thank you very much.
Simul, do you want to take
Yes,
it and then I'll do the mic?
I'd like to respond to this. I think it kind of joins in with what we were discussing just 2 seconds ago about Pakistan's strategy. What does Pakistan want from Afghanistan? It's been an ongoing process. There have been a lot of changes in Pakistan's approach to Afghanistan, similarly as there have been changes in US policy on Afghanistan also when the war started in 2001 to now. There has been a reassessment of Pakistan's policy. There was a view in globally and even in Pakistan within certain actors that what Pakistan wants in Afghanistan after the 2014 withdrawal is a full imposition of the Taliban into the Afghan power circles. That is, for me, a big fundamental change that has happened. That is no longer true about what Pakistan is trying to work at and where I think we want to go forward. We are still behind having or starting a broad negotiated peace process, which includes the Taliban, which includes actually all the different insurgent groups fighting within Taliban and outside Taliban. But there is a clear realization that this is no longer the Afghanistan of 1990s, where Taliban can be imposed in the center. And there is a realization in Pakistan that Pakistan does not have the same kind of power or space to change events within Afghanistan as it did in 1990s. Pakistan is no longer the main actor in Afghanistan. That factor has sunk in. And leading from that, there is a number of changes that have occurred in Pakistan's policy going forward.
As to the question whether the PAC military is an obstacle to the U.S., I think it's a relationship that must be managed. I think that as an example, this is something that existed for years now, and that is the Navy and Air Force relies on U.S. security assistance a great deal more than the Army does. Our traditional security assistance has benefited the PAC Navy and Air Force considerably over the years, and will likely continue to do so. There's probably less room for cooperation with the Army because the Army has the resources it perceives it needs because it doesn't provide as much to their other services, their counterparts in the other services. But is it an obstacle? I think a sovereign military is going to pursue its own interests and will serve its interests and thus remain an obstacle where it deems that the outside power is influencing, over-influencing, or taking contrary terms with it.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, Paul Lundberg. Yesterday or a couple of days ago, President Zardari announced that the elections would be held in early May. This means that as the Obama administration is getting fully geared up, the Pakistan government is likely going to be changing. In some way, it's going to be changing. You have the fact that this has been the most historically stable government in Pakistan's history, at least since the 70s and more so. It has had has its feet more firmly on the ground vis-a-vis its own military than any other elected government has. And it's been a government dominated by mustaches, not by beards. But you have now Jamaat Islami is not going to boycott this election. Baluch nationalist parties are not going to boycott this election. The flavor of the month, PTI, is gearing up for this election and has a rather anti-American point of view. So how do you see the potential of a changed Pakistani political makeup in terms of how the relationship or the partnership with the United States is going to change in the coming 2-3 years?
Simul, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think this whole discussion, me and Mueed have had a very lively discussion over how the chips are going to fall after the next elections, and we both don't agree on that. But of course, it's going to be a change. There is going to be a new team that's going to come in. But your kind of characterization of the big fighters like Jamaat Islami and PTI, I'm not convinced that they're going to win any significant amount of seats to really change the power structure. I think it's again going to be the big two mainstream parties that are going to be up against each other. It's going to be PMLN and PPP facing off, and of course with the importance of the regional parties, which are also known players, MQM and ANP in Fatah and Frontier Province. Balochistan, again, even if the Baloch nationalists are there, there's going to be a number of seats that they'll win. There's a lot of corruption that goes around in elections in Balochistan. We have to see how much change and how many of them, how many of the people would be able to be bought over by whoever wins the majority. So it's going to be the mainstream parties, and I think as far as People's Party and PMLN views on Afghanistan or other regional situation is concerned, there is not so much of a difference. There is a mainstream political view in Pakistan, regional or global view in Pakistan, which is coming forward. Of course, there is a fringe view. You have the Fundus and the Jamaat Islami and a few other actors and the Defy Pakistan groups, but that's still a very fringe view. Mainstream political parties, they have a certain view, worldview. I don't see any major change in that with the elections.
If I could just add, I think we have to be careful, sort of as in the U.S. government, to one sort of call the PTI anti. I think we have to sort of be very careful how we say anti-America versus anti-American policy, and I think Imran Khan has actually even made this pretty clear. The second thing I would say is we've done this before. When we labeled the PMLN, we labeled Nawaz Sharif as sort of more of a fundamentalist. So how do we work with him? And the reality is we have to work with who the Pakistanis elect and put in office. I do think the trend that we are seeing in the United States, in India, and around the world is going to continue in Pakistan. And by that I mean we're going to see a parliamentary structure that's going to be very much muddled. You're going to have PMLN, you're going to have PPP, and you're going to see a lot of gridlock. And so if we're going to, from our perspective, if we want to see some real changes in some of the things inside Pakistan that are, I think, impacting Pakistan moving forward, things on the economy, things on energy, it's going to be sort of a long slog because the government structure is going to be mired in gridlock. So to be able to move forward on these things is going to be much more difficult than it is even now.
Yes, this is Dr. Nisar Chaudhry. It was very enlightening to listen to all the distinguished panelists. What Michael had mentioned, that right now there is a space has been created between USA and Pakistan. And that space has been created on one hand. USA has understood their limitations, and also they have understood the limitations of Pakistan. And at the same time, both sides have demonstrated flexibility. Now it depends how much both the countries can capitalize on the space they have achieved. Second thing was, Mueed mentioned about resolve. I think for resolve, you need character, priority, and commitment. That is what resolve means here. And it depends on the leadership in Pakistan, what kind of level of commitment, resolve, and determination they demonstrate, because America wants that they should protect their interests, because America is protecting their own interests. Then the next thing is that US-Pakistan relations, when we talk of USA leaving in 2014, I mean, it's very elusive. Where they will go? They are going to keep the most powerful army and 60% of their fleet in Asia and Pacific. They will continue to remain our neighbors. Within 24 hours, they can reach Afghanistan whenever they want to. Their main concern is that whether they should keep 25,000 people there or 20,000 people there. And if they keep there, how Russia would react to it, how China would react to it when they will be in their neighborhood. So my question is, since Michael has spoken extensively on military-civil relationship, do you think this alignment has started working better and it's being reinforced? Because Pakistan's survival lies in sustainable democracy. And that sustainable democracy would lead to enduring friendship between these two countries. And my friend who said Imran Khan is anti-Pakistan, USA, I think he has misunderstood him completely. He's only asking that Pakistan and USA should jointly define common objectives and work together jointly on them. Not that USA should define the objectives, then hire Pakistan to implement or achieve those objectives.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think in my comments, I stated that this arm's length relationship that is developing now, that gives a more traditional, a more common diplomatic relationship between countries. It allows more resilience, I think. We're not watching for every misstep, whether it be in the application of donor funds, whether it be in the misappropriation for various purposes, whether it be suspicions about political parties or motives behind things. Rather, it will be more of a mature relationship that has expectations that are made evident. From time to time, they're clarified. But essentially, it's up to the partners, the parties to the relationship, to determine the progress that's made in the relationship. You can incentivize progress, certainly, or certain steps, but if you don't see common value, that progress that is made will be quickly lost. Assistance, security assistance, economic assistance has always found that once that assistance evaporates, if the country, the government, the entity that received it was not generally interested in it at the beginning, it's going to wither. So I agree that I'm encouraged that the relationship will be based on a more sober assessment of each other's expectations and capabilities, and that progress will be made at a pace that is governed more by the parties' willingness to move rather than a massive optimism around a show of good faith or support. I think that realism sinks into this.
It's a very small follow-up, very brief. USA has strategic relationships with India, which is a neighbor of Pakistan. What is the difference between the nature of relationship that USA has with India and with Pakistan? And what resists America to have a strategic relationship with Pakistan?
Look quickly at how the United States reacted when it didn't win one of its security assistance agreements with India. How quickly the naysayers about the quality of this relationship with India was brought into question. We have an expectation with whoever our partner is around the world that we hope that they will agree with us on more things than not, but we are also impatient. We're not confident in every case that the government's decision that is made is the right one for the U.S., and we're quick to bring scrutiny. The closer we are to a country, the more scrutiny and expectation we have. So I think that our strategic relationship, and one, what does it mean? Major non-NATO ally in Pakistan, did that really fundamentally change things between us, or the trust level between us, or not? So a strategic relationship based on a strategic dialogue does not make it so. It has to be a relationship that's ongoing and that is proving the theory rather than simply stating it.
You want to say something? I just wanted to, I think there's a big difference, actually, in sort of the strategic relationship and the relationship we have with Pakistan, the relationship we have with India. I think Ambassador Holbrooke really tried to broaden the scope of the relationship that we had with Pakistan so that it was beyond the CT and the proliferation. And we actually started calling for a long-term strategic partnership with Pakistan. And then after 2010 and 11, there was a fundamental shift, and you no longer hear that anymore. You don't hear the State Department say we have a strategic relationship with Pakistan. Fortunately, our relationship with Pakistan right now does not expand beyond those areas. I wish it could, and I wish it will in the future. We don't have it. We're right now focused on these sort of very limited things. And in India, we've sort of moved beyond some of these the nuclear issue. And we're talking about things like education and health and human rights and working together in third countries. So we've moved beyond some of these sort of core irritants in the relationship to say, these are the things, there is a space for us to work together, and these are the things we're going to be working together. Michael's right, there are definitely some naysayers who think that this is nascent, and there was a lot of disappointment after the Merca deal. But we're moved beyond these sort of 2-3 things in the relationship. And once we can get beyond that, I think, with Pakistan, ideally will look to Pakistan as a strategic partner once again.
Thank you. Omar Samad, senior Afghan expert here at USIP and former Afghan diplomat. I think that it would be unfortunate if we didn't inject an Afghan perspective here, even though this is US-Pakistan relations. Two of the speakers spoke about Pakistan-Afghanistan dialogue as being maybe helpful and trying to sort out relationship issues. I personally am part of a Track 2 Afghan policy group that just met a few days ago with Pakistanis and Indians and Iranians and Central Asians, and they are hoping that the Chinese would also join soon. And there were a few takeaways from this meeting that took place, which was part of this initiative sponsored by Germans, actually, to help bridge differences and create some dialogue. And some of the takeaways I want to share with you before I pose a question. One is that it was very clear in this meeting that the Afghanistan of 2012 and the Afghanistan of 2014, for that matter, is not the Afghanistan of the 1980s and 90s. And so the country has evolved. The people today, with a population that is 70% or so less than 30 years of age, has totally different outlook and perceptions about its future. Secondly, that that there's an expectation that the Pakistani security paradigm, as was mentioned, would evolve. And you alluded to that to some extent, that not only would it evolve, but it would evolve in the right direction. Number three takeaway was that there is a trust deficit within Afghanistan, not only with its own government, but there's a trust deficit with the neighbors, and especially with two of the neighbors who have been mostly accused of meddling. And that trust deficit is not associated with just one particular region of the country or ethnic group, that it is national, and that there is no sympathy that is hardcore for one neighbor or the other, or for one particular group or the other in the neighborhood. And finally, the final takeaway was that instability and continued conflict in Afghanistan, if there is no political resolution, will definitely not be confined to Afghanistan. Post-2014, the fallout will definitely be very destructive to the region and to the neighbors and to those who today either are harboring or helping certain groups. So having said that, from this dialogue, we hope that we will make some progress as we move forward. But Ms. Khan, I think, alluded to the fact that Pakistan, in its fight against all militants, is seeking its own way, in its own pace.
I
yes.
said picking and choosing,
yeah.
not fighting against all. That's
Sorry?
what I said.
Fighting against its own militants?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's still a differentiation in your view of Afghan militants versus Pakistani militants, and there is no approach towards the Afghan militants.
Yeah.
That's one question. Number two question is, when you talk about a change that may have taken place in the paradigm, and you allude to the fact that they do not want the Taliban to take over and be in charge of Kabul and all of Afghanistan, what we keep hearing about, of course, is power sharing. Now, the Afghan view is the door is open for anyone to come and join and be part of the political process. But power sharing is something that has to come through elections in the political process. So if you could elaborate that and give us a Pakistani perspective on what that may mean for the future of the process itself. Thank you.
Short, because we're on.
Yeah. Yes, I share most of your takeaways that you talked about from the track 2s that you've been part of. I've been myself part of several of such track 2s, and this is basically the consensus coming out. In my presentation, I made it clear that Pakistan is fighting against some militant groups. It's still drawing those distinctions that it drew between the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan Taliban. That distinction is there. I don't see any change in that perspective. As far as the political process in Afghanistan or Pakistani position on that is. I agree with your take. Afghans themselves have their own opinion right now. There is a government in the center in Afghanistan which has functioned for the past now 10 years. There's a civil society actors there. There is a big movement, and there's a general understanding of that the Afghans should get together and talk about things. Pakistan's position is very clear. We want to support any effort that takes the Afghans themselves towards peace. We support, first of all, I think we've said it very clearly last year, since last 2 years, that we support an intra-Afghan dialogue, because for us, whatever happened in 9/11 and after that, the way the war panned out, in effect, what was happening in the 90s, there was an intra-Afghan war that was going on. There was a factional war that was going on. Some of them were Pashtun Taliban faction, then there were others in the north, they were fighting. There was a lot of unresolved issue at the ground. And now, how are these things solved? I don't think we need to really, kind of develop new ideas. There is a whole amount of literature available, amount of world experience in the UN that's available, where they've dealt with post-conflict societies, where countries have gone through long periods of war, civil war, and other kinds of war, and how they move forward. I'm sure when the Afghans sit together, Pakistan is going to be supportive of any process that starts there. Sit together, they can reach to a formula that is suitable to the Afghan situation. We are just going to be supportive, I think, of the Afghans.
So we have 5 minutes and 4 questions. Why don't we take 2 at a time and then get the panelists to answer?
All right, I'll try to be briefer than I would otherwise. I do, however, support the idea that you have, it was Sambal, I think, mentioned earlier about having a whole session on just Pakistan and Afghanistan, Pakistan's goals.
You guys really want me to have more gray hair, but I'll give it a shot. Go for it.
Yeah, I worked on this for years, and I got a lot of gray hair doing it. Or lost it. Having worked on it for years, what I was always unclear of, and I'd be curious what our panelists would say, is does the United States obviously would like to keep some force for counterterrorism in Afghanistan after 2014. Is Pakistan going to perceive that as hostile and dangerous to Pakistan's interests? Because that will impact this dynamic greatly.
Thank you. Sir.
Evening. I'm Tanveer Wani. I'm a program manager at IMTD. Well, President Obama's foreign policy in his first term has primarily been pragmatic, and which in Pakistan means drone strikes, killing of Osama bin Laden, which he was successful. But there are some foreign policy bunks which say that Obama's foreign policy on rhetoric was kind of failure, like on the rhetorical front. And given the fact that second term is all about legacy, so in Pakistan, wouldn't it mean, like if he works on rhetoric, so wouldn't it mean just going further from what Sudhir said, just CT and non-proliferation, and it'll mean something of education, trade, and health, as Sudhir said, it is not beyond that. It's a question to you.
Who would like to? I'll just address yours. I think that there's not enough political space right now for the administration and Congress to go back to looking at these other broadened sort of scope of relationship. What we're going to be doing is focused on Afghanistan in 2014 and making sure that Pakistan does not, that I would say sort of at medium, Pakistan stays on the sidelines and doesn't hurt the process. And at best can still sort of play that role to help the process. But there's not a political space to do anything, I think, more. We've tried that approach. We've tried to do everything, to put everything on the table, and it hasn't worked. And so there's not enough, I don't think there's any political space in the next couple of years to go back to that approach.
Just a quick response to the first question. The CT force has long been understood by the regional players, and the U.S. has never hidden that. And the Afghanistan, the agreement with the United States is based on that being a primary factor. I see that they see it as something to keep an eye on, certainly, and it may serve as the vehicle going forward post-2014 as being the mean if drone strikes were to continue and that sort of thing. But as a danger, as a threat, I haven't heard it described as such. It's something of an understood. Now, the size of it and its role, whether it's narrowly focused on Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda associated, or whether it's more broadly focused on anti-Taliban, or that would be the associated groups for specific purposes, remains unsaid.
The last two questions there, and then we'll get the final comments and the answers.
Veronica Cartier, I'm a consultant for international relations and researcher. I learned that Pakistan have problem in electricity and energy, and you have a lot of assistance from China. But my specific question is in the security sector, especially to Ms. Khan. Will you be able to discuss your Pakistan strong relationship with China, especially what is the goal of the relationship, and is it in compliance with Pakistan-United States relationship?
Okay.
Thank you.
Last question. No, we'll have another question. We'll get the answer.
Hi, my name is Christine Vargas. I'm a recent graduate of Johns Hopkins SAIS, and I've been working on Afghan economic security and women's rights issues for the past year and a half. And my question's about stratcoms in Pakistan. I think it's very important for the Pakistani people in every way possible to really comprehend what the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is and how it evolves. However, without strategic communications, you can't do that. So my question is, what stratcoms currently exist in Pakistan for that purpose? Can they be improved? And if they were improved, who would truly control them? The military, civilian politicians? And what slice of the pie would terrorists have in co-opting those stratcoms?
Okay. Why don't we start with Michael and work our way down, answers to the questions and any final comments you may have.
As I understand your question on the strategic communications element, you're speaking of the development of a Pakistani strategic communications capability, as opposed to the one that we've concentrated mostly on, which is the U.S. capacity to send a message or explain a message. There has been some training, certainly, in Pakistan to try to develop a better understanding and responsiveness to this. I don't have a good measure that since we suspended training, that this has been picked up by any entity in Pakistan as its own. I know that pressure has mounted within the media and elsewhere on the institutions within Pakistan to reduce the amount of influence they're having on media outlets. I think it can be argued that to some extent they've recognized some of the negative impact that their manipulation has had. But as far as a strategic operational effort going forward, I think it may require a better regulatory environment for the media itself. They already self-censor, but do so in a way that maintains their sense of security, unfortunately, from those elements within the Pakistan that might threaten them for being transparent about what's going on in the country. But I am not aware, maybe my panelists are, of any overarching effort to improve that capacity within the Pakistani government.
I think that is still pretty low on the list of to-do list that we have, and I don't think there is any movement forward on that yet. Just coming to the China question, I think China and Pakistan have had one of the most closest relationship. It's a strategic, for us, that is really a strategic partnership, and even for the Chinese, they go along with how we describe it. I don't see any kind of divergences going forward. It's a relationship, it's a very broad relationship. I mean, it's partly based on trade as well as military to military. It's a very strong relationship. They've helped us build our some of our nuclear reactors and given us all kinds of support. And of course, there is a geopolitical relationship because, of course, we are regional countries which share a border. We have various kind of geopolitical interests. India has always had, initially started off in the 60s, had border issues with China, and Pakistan also had border issues with India. So obviously, the enemy of your friend becomes your enemy, and so that scenario has always continued. But now, recently, over the years, I think Pakistan and China have developed their own dynamic, which is not that India-centric anymore. And they both rely on each other for various purposes, and I think that's going to continue. But my last comment, I want to come back to that point, was raised before this question about the CT presence or counter-terror presence of US counter-terror presence post-2014 and Pakistan's perspective on that. I tried to touch it on in my presentation, and I think the question basically is not the presence per se. I agree with Michael that it's really not an issue about having a US counter-terror presence in Afghanistan. Pakistan has not had any issue with US presence in Afghanistan. I mean, without Pakistan's support for the past 10 years, we discovered under Salala how difficult that kind of, the way war unfolded in Afghanistan would have happened if Pakistan hadn't allowed that kind of a support, logistic support. So for us, it's really not a threat. Pakistan is a partner to the US. It sees itself as a partner to US. It's not really a threat. It's not the presence per se, but what the intentions of the US would be, to what the presence would lead to, that has been a concern. And what I hinted in my presentation, that I feel that there are modalities, there are modifications of strategies which would help in reducing Pakistan's concerns as far as that presence was concerned. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists and to all of you. I'll just say one word about the communications bit that you asked. I think Pakistan first needs to figure out how to communicate, then we'll come to strategic communications. I haven't seen another country with such a bad repo virtually everywhere it works. So perhaps there's a start there to be made. Thank you all. I did not mention in the beginning, you can find the full bios of our panelists outside and USIP publications on Pakistan. We'll keep filling your inboxes with future events. Thanks for coming. Please join me in thanking the panelists.